And good afternoon. My name is Evan Weiner, and we're going to talk about America's excuse to throw a midwinter weekend party, and that is the Super Bowl, which is now just a party. Maybe not this year. You might not be able to get people together in February of 2021, but this is one of the major parties of the year. In fact, it surpassed New Year's Eve as a party day in the United States. But the Super Bowl's roots actually have nothing to do with football necessarily. The Super Bowl is what it is today because of an act of Congress, and it was signed into law, the Super Bowl, because of the merger of the American Football League and the National Football League, back in November of 1966 by the President of the United States, Lyndon Johnson. And that is me, and some of you who are football fans might recognize the guy with the blonde hair eating the banana, and he's probably still eating the banana. It's Phil Simms, who was a Super Bowl MVP. Phil and I know each other for about 40 years, and Phil is typically a left-handed person, except he threw a football with his right arm. But Phil is... Let's put it this way. There are a couple of screws loose in Phil's head, but I've known him for 40 years, and I can tell you some stories about him. But here I am. This is 1982, and it's Pace University in New York, where the Giants held training camp. And I have no idea what I was talking to Phil about, and Phil was more interested in his banana than talking to me, but that's okay too, because I'm kind of intruding on him eating his banana. But the Super Bowl, he was a Super Bowl MVP. The Super Bowl was created after the United States Congress passed legislation allowing the merger of the American and National Football Leagues. The merger was tacked on to an anti-inflation bill. You tell me what senator is going to say, hey, I'm voting for inflation. It was put onto an anti-inflation bill signed into law by Lyndon Johnson, November 8th, 1966. Okay, cut and dry. Let's get out of here. Well, not quite. Let's talk about a couple of things about the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl security is handled by the United States Secret Service. It's a level 1 event in the United States, special events assessment rating level 1 event. There have been 50 agencies that have been working on this year's Super Bowl in Tampa since September of 2019. It takes a year and a half to secure the Super Bowl. There is absolutely no word on how much it costs taxpayers to provide security. The National Football League, the 31 owners, and the board of directors for the Green Bay Packers do not reach into their pockets to help pay for the security of the event. Some of the agencies that are involved in making sure the Super Bowl goes ahead and we don't have one of those movies like Black Sunday, which came out many, many years ago. The FBI, FEMA, TSA, the Customs and Border Patrol, local police, and state police in Florida are all part of the security team. All these people have been in Florida actually since September of 2018, because last year's Super Bowl was hosted by the Miami Dolphins up in Broward County. So it's been a while since the FBI, FEMA, and everybody else have been working on Super Bowls in Florida. Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is a product of the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s and also Jim Crow. 1964-65, American Football League All Stars. And over there looking at the guy who's there with the tickets in his hand. On the left is Curtis McClinton. Earl Faison's behind him. Butch Beard is the guy right here looking at them. And there were 22 African-American AFL All Stars who were selected for the game. And the whole idea behind the American Football League putting a game in New Orleans, the 8 teams in the American Football League were going to become 9 teams. And New Orleans was supposed to get an American Football League team either for 1965 or 1966, more than likely 1965. Dave Dixon, the guy who founded the United States Football League back in 1981, was the guy who convinced Lamar Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs, the founder of the American Football League, and Bud Adams of the Houston Oilers. Let's come to New Orleans. Everything's going to be great. Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act into law on July 7th of 1964. Not going to be a problem. Everybody is going to be equal. Jim Crow is gone. Don't worry about it. The Negro players, that's how people were referred to back in 1964-65. The Negro players would be fine. There won't be any problem. They'll be treated as equal to the white players. But the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry. Here's the background. Civil Rights Act, 1964. Jim Crow, New Orleans, a players' boycott. Senator Russell Long, Representative Hale Boggs, both of Louisiana. Hale Boggs, the father of Cookie Roberts, who was on NPR and ABC for a long time. The Brooklyn representative, Emanuel Seller, who, and Jim and I are going to talk about this in a little bit, who in 1961 gave the National Football League and Commissioner Pete Rozelle an antitrust exemption. So Rozelle could sell the National Football League's 14 teams as one in an auction between CBS and NBC back in those days. He was from Brooklyn, Emanuel Seller, and they were all part of the Super Bowl creation, mostly by accident, mostly by design after they were pulled into it. Now, Ron Mix played with the San Diego Chargers between 1960 and 1970. He finished up with the Oakland Raiders in 1971. He's a Hall of Fame offensive tackle. He was also, and is still to this day, he's about 83 years old now. He is a lawyer. And a few years ago, I called Ron. I know Ron, or knew Ron. I called him, and this was when the Los Angeles Clippers players were going to go on strike to demonstrate against Donald Sterling, who said some, let's say, awkward things to his mistress about her bringing too many black guys to games, and he didn't want it. And the Clippers players were about ready to strike, and eventually Sterling was thrown out of the league. But I called Ron because I was looking for some sort of parallel between what happened in New Orleans in 1964-65 and the Los Angeles Clippers situation. And he said there really wasn't a parallel. And he told me about New Orleans. When the white players decided to back up the black players who decided that they were going to boycott the AFL All Star game. Mix told me we were aware that New Orleans was hosting the game to demonstrate to the American Football League and the National Football League they could support the football franchise. The last thing we wanted to do was assist them in demonstrating they could support the franchise. A boycott was the only alternative for the players. But this wasn't the first boycott of a game in New Orleans over civil rights. Now, this guy, Walter Beach. Walter Beach was a player with the Boston Patriots, a team owned by Billy Sullivan. And Jim will like this. My friend Shelley Saltman and his friend Shelley Saltman, who was beaten up by Evel Knievel, had stock in the Boston Patriots. Just show you how much the teams were worth back then. Shelley paid $100 for his stock in Billy Sullivan's Boston Patriots in 1959. Anyway, Walter Beach was signed by the Boston Patriots. I think he went to Kent's alma mater, Central Michigan University. He's a Michigan guy. So he signs with the Patriots. He's a civil rights activist. And he starts complaining. He tells Billy Sullivan and all the other people who are involved with the Boston Patriots American Football League franchise, okay, I'm going to New Orleans, I'm going to play, but I want equal treatment to the white players on the team. And Patriots said, no, you got to abide by the Green Book. You got to go to a separate hotel. You're going to be taken there by a cab, whoever is going to take you there. There was a problem with cabs in New Orleans back in the 1960s. If you were a Negro, you could not get a cab on your own. However, if you were with a white guy and he was taking you, you could have a cab on your, you could take a cab ride in New Orleans back in those days. So Walter said, no, I want to eat with my teammates. I want to stay in the same hotel as my teammates. I want the same treatment as my teammates. Billy Sullivan and the Patriots didn't particularly like him asking for that. Walter Beach was cut by the Boston Patriots in 1961, labeled a troublemaker for organizing a protest against the black players, among the black players with the Patriots, against segregated living conditions during the team's road trip to New Orleans. He was fired. He ended up with the Cleveland Browns, played there for a couple of years, and he was part of the Cleveland Summit in 1968 when Jim Brown and Flea Roberts and Lou Alcindor interviewed Muhammad Ali to find out if he was sincere in his beliefs when he decided not to join the American military. But Walter Beach had the first protest in New Orleans. That's Cookie Gilchrist. He was a running back with the Buffalo Bills, and he did get a cab because he was with Jack Kemp. Kemp was the American Football League executive director of the Players Association. And they were teammates, and Gilchrist was able to get to either the Fontainebleau Hotel or the other hotel, the Hotel Roosevelt in New Orleans, where the players were staying. So he did get a cab. He wasn't left behind at the airport. New Orleans leaders said city was going to welcome the All Stars, 22 black players with open arms, segregation gone, Jim Crow gone. And we want that football team. We really want that football team. And the National Football League wanted to go in there, except they went into Atlanta. So the American Football League saw this opening. Let's take New Orleans and let's run with it. We'll put the All-Star game in there. Big announcement, Tulane Stadium at halftime. Everybody will cheer wildly. We've kicked off the AFL in New Orleans. At the time, the American Football League was the only league to truly embrace African-American athletes as an equal on the field with white players. The National Football League, from about 1948 to about 1962, there was a quota of 4 African-American players per team. Irv Cross, the CBS announcer on the NFL Today back in the 70s and 80s, I sent him an email a couple months ago to see how he was doing in COVID, and we started talking about this. And he said 1961, he was with the Eagles. He said, yep. He said, now that I think of it, there were 4 of us on the Eagles. And he started thinking about it. He said, other than Lombardi and Green Bay, every team had 4 or less back in those days. So anyway, so they're the first, they say black players, white players, they were all equal. Why was that? Well, the National Football League, their scouts went to the big-time schools and big-time conferences. South, Alabama, Ole Miss, they were all segregated. The American Football League needed players, and they were going to get players from wherever they could. And those schools included Grambling University in Louisiana, Bethune-Cookman in Florida, Prairie View, among others, Morgan State. They went looking for players, and they did find the players. Those guys could play. The NFL just passed over them because, hey, they were with those schools, and we don't scout those schools. We don't want those players. The irony of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is that it destroyed the big-time black college football programs, because the best players could go to the University of Alabama, even though George Wallace didn't want Negroes at the University of Alabama or Ole Miss or Georgia or South Carolina or Auburn or Texas. And the coaches went out and got the black players and took them away from guys like Eddie Robinson and Grambling University. So yeah, the Civil Rights Act did work for football players, but it harmed the traditional black schools. It's my buddy Abner Haynes. He lives in Dallas now. Abner's about 83, 84 years old. He was the first Negro player, as he tells me, to integrate Texas football. He played at North Texas University in 1956 and played week to week. He was also, in 1961, the captain of the Dallas Texans football team. And he's told me a lot of stories, too, about Dallas and about other places that he was playing in the 1960s. He ended up being Joe Namath's roommate with the New York Jets in 1967. But Abner was telling me the story after all these guys are sitting at the airport because they couldn't get cabs, and there are calls being made back and forth between some of the players and Jack Kemp, and eventually Bud Adams, the Houston owner, who calls up the governor of Louisiana and calls up the mayor of New Orleans and said, we got our guys sitting at the airport. Eventually, they got cabs for the players, the colored cabs for the colored players, as one player once told me. So Hayes gets to Hotel Roosevelt with David Grayson. They were both with the Kansas City Chiefs. Abner told me that when they left Kansas City, Lamar Hunt, he was playing Kansas City at the time. Lamar Hunt said, Abner, name, rank, and serial number. You're Abner Haynes, running back, Kansas City Chiefs, playing in the American Football League All-Star Game. That's all you say. Don't say anything else to anybody. Haynes compared to other people had an easy time of it. Ernie Ladd, 6'9", 315 pounds, was with Earl Faison, and they were going down Bourbon Street, and Ladd had gone to Grambling University in Louisiana, and they decided they were going to a bar down on Bourbon Street. So they walk into the bar, and one of these guys, a little guy from what I was told, says to Ernie Ladd, I don't think you should be in here. And Ladd said, I am here. Civil Rights Act was passed. I'm allowed in here. He said, no, you don't seem to understand. I don't think you should be in here. And he took out a gun, pointed at Ladd and Faison were gone. So all of these guys are meeting in the Hotel Roosevelt. Haynes was talking about after he got the cab ride. They check into the Roosevelt Hotel, David Grayson and Abner Haynes, and they walk over to the elevator. Now, it was one of these old hand-cranked elevators that had the gate, and young people won't remember this at all, although I think Macy's had that kind of elevator until about 1975, 76 in Herald Square. Anyway, the woman is operating the elevator, the hand crank. She stops it. The door opens. She pulls back the gate and looks up and says, hey, monkeys, what are you doing here? And Abner and David gave name, rank, and serial number. That's all they did. This is Abner's words, Abner Haynes' words. They had a woman operating the elevator, and she said, you monkeys, come on in, get to the back. Finally, we had about 10 or 12 guys in my room. We were talking sensibly. We're going to stay together. This was just another test. Abner had witnessed Jim Crow as a member of the Dallas Texans. He played a preseason game in 1961 in Fayetteville, Arkansas against the San Diego Chargers because Lance Allworth had been a big star at the University of Arkansas. And Hank Stram, old Henry, I loved Henry, taps Abner on the shoulder, says, you know the drill. And Abner said, yeah, I do. And they got into a car, and they were taken to the other side of town, straight out of Green Book. We had no leverage. We weren't playing for money, but we were playing for progress. Football players took the lead. At that point, I stopped Abner. I said, you didn't take the lead. There was a lot of stuff going on in the South. And then I said, you took the lead among football players. And he said, yeah, that's true, but we took the lead. These guys put their collective necks on the line, their careers on the line, by having some sort of action. And this all takes place over a 36-hour period in New Orleans. Football players took the lead. Places like Atlanta, New Orleans, and Miami were death holes. Dave Grayson couldn't get a drink at the bar. Our white teammates in New Orleans were there for us. He was there, Jack Kemp. That's a picture of me and Jack back in 1978, 79. He was Congressman Jack Kemp, and I was a 22-year-old reporter interviewing Jack Kemp, who was talking about trickle-down economics to me that day and just kept talking and talking and talking, and then I changed the subject. Hey, whatever happened to Albert Golden Wheels Dominion? He said, you mean rusted hubcaps now? I said, yeah, him. But I had a relationship with Jack for about 30 years, and there's Jack. Jack asked me about that picture. He said, what happened to your hair? And I said, what happened to your wig? And in 2003, that's my son with Jack at the Arizona Biltmore, and Jack is handing my son, who at that point was 17 years old, a drink. And I said, Jack, he's 17. Don't listen to your father. What do you want? He's
Nice
17.
afro, Evan, by the way.
What? Yes. Anyway, I said, Jack said, don't listen to him. What do you want? You got my son a drink, his first legal drink, at the age of 17, Arizona Biltmore. But Jack puts his career on the line because he backs up the players as the head of the Players Association. And one thing about Jack in 1964, he was looking at a political career. He was at Barry Goldwater's surrogate in Western New York, campaigning for Barry Goldwater, and he had the football career as well. So he had two careers that he could have put in jeopardy because he was backing the players. Haynes said one of the things we, the AFL, needed was the unity of the white and black players for our new league, which started in 1960. When the white players, Jack Kemp, Jerry Mays, who was our Kansas City defensive leader, and 4 or 5 other guys, heard about what was happening, their character showed. And my teammates were looking after me. The players voted to boycott. God, we're not playing the game. It was up to Jack Kemp to tell Bud Adams we're not playing. The game was subsequently rescheduled to Houston, for Houston that Sunday. And Abner Haynes said Houston was no day at the beach either, but they had a team there, so they knew what was going on in the Jim Crow South. So the game is played in Houston. There is no game in New Orleans, and football is going into the 1965 season. New Orleans doesn't know what hits them. I'm going to bring Jim in here for 1 second, and we're going to talk a little bit about why there was a merger. And Jim, it was TV. It was David Sarnoff giving the American Football League money to compete with the National Football League. Jim there? Jim, you got, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
Sorry, I was hitting unmute, but it wasn't.
Oh, okay.
My apologies.
You worked in TV. How did TV impact all of this stuff?
Well, I mean, to be honest, because the first, as we all know, the first Super Bowl had both NBC and CBS doing it. But from that point forward, the league decided they were going to put the game up for bid, and so you could actually, get a serious amount of money for it if you alternated it between CBS and NBC at that time. The real situation with regard to how the Super Bowl became an event really was the advertisers, the creativity, and that started around Super Bowl 5 or 6. There started to become what we all know now as the Super Bowl commercials.
Yes.
And it was the Super Bowl commercials that kind of made this a national holiday. And as we got into the 70s, right, the Monday Night Football had launched, and our good friends, Mr. Cosell and Goodrich.
Howard Cosell and Roan, get over here, Arledge.
Right. They were instrumental in making it mainstream. Football became mainstream. You didn't have to be a football fan to watch the Super Bowl. You didn't have to be, know who's playing for that matter. The one thing that they did to attract women to the Super Bowl was to create these amazing commercials. And throughout that entire 70s period, that's where you got the, the Mean Joe Green Coca-Cola commercial, which is iconic. From, the kid brings me Coca-Cola and he tosses the jersey back to him. That's really where things got to be interesting. And each year, the Super Bowl situation got a little more intense. Finally, ABC got into the act, so it was NBC, CBS, ABC. Then Fox later, took away the NFC
from CBS.
From CBS. CBS grabbed the AFC, and NBC was out in the cold until they got the Saturday night package. But specifically on Super Bowl, it has been year in and year out the biggest single day event here in the United States, and and it really now is a 2-week event. It's not just that,
Ah,
but as Evan said earlier, and I just want to put a bow on that part of it, if you don't mind. Um, at the Super Bowl 25, which was ironically held in Tampa, uh, it was also held during Operation Desert Storm, and there was only 1 week in between the actual game and the final playoffs. And General Schwarzkopf was going to be at the halftime celebration at that game. So behind the scoreboards at either end of what we used to call the old sombrero, which was a big round stadium, Tampa Stadium at the time, um, there were gunships. And when I say gunships, I'm talking about massive helicopters with guns in them, uh, just in case somebody wanted to do something during the Super Bowl. And there were helicopters and all kinds of different things going on. And from a television standpoint, doing a Super Bowl, you don't just do a Super Bowl, you do it in with a international feed. There's probably at last count 27 languages that the game is broadcast in. So it came from what used to be when one of our friends, Hal Uplinger, who was part of the first Super Bowl for CBS, from the days of Hal Uplinger and their 7-camera coverage of the Super Bowl in Los Angeles in 1967, all the way up until this one coming up at 2021 in Tampa. There'll be somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 cameras and and an army of people who will be working on these events. But yeah, television and Super Bowl are hand in glove, and specifically the amount of money that TV has um, put in the coffers of the NFL owners is really unparalleled. When you have a, a franchise you paid originally $78 million for, which is now worth $2.9 billion. That's a pretty decent return on investment,
no,
and a great deal of it has to do with what television did and what frankly the Super Bowl helped television to be, and even now to this day, not only is it a big event from a advertising standpoint, it's also a big event because what happens is if you're going to launch a new show, you if you're NBC, CBS, or Fox, you're going to want to put that show directly on after the Super Bowl so you get an amazing lead in. So I don't know if that's what you needed, Evan, but buddy,
no,
I'm
no.
here for you.
I'm gonna talk about the politics of all of this now and
Okay.
how this is going to be the civics lesson for the day on how a bill is passed in Congress and gets to the presidential desk. So New Orleans is looking on the outside, looking in. And New Orleans would become a political pawn. The Super Bowl would rise out of the ashes of the New Orleans boycott. The American Football League and National Football League, Texas E. Schramm of the Dallas Cowboys and Lamar Hunt of the Kansas City Chiefs met under the Lone Ranger statue at Love Field, hammered out this agreement on June 6th, and Pete Rozelle, the commissioner of the NFL, announces it on June 8th. However, the two entities could not become one. They couldn't get married without an antitrust exemption from Congress. And I'm going to get Jim here in a minute to talk about the first antitrust exemption they got from
Evan,
Emmanuel
can
Zeller.
I add something,
Yeah,
please?
yeah.
You're forgetting the Hunt's connection to a certain group who had maybe a connection to something happened about a year earlier in Lamar's hometown of Dallas.
Well, I'm not going to discuss that right now. We'll leave that.
Okay.
We'll leave that alone. But anyway, Lamar and Tex, and there is Pete Rozelle in 1986 at the United States Football League NFL antitrust trial, and Pete and I are smiling. There's me. I wore a tie in those days. We're smiling. So either I said something to Pete or Pete said something to me, and we walked away after that. And I think I'm thinking of Artie, who was the producer for Keith Olbermann over at CNN at that point. Artie deserved a medal, but he wasn't working. He was working with another guy at that point. That was right after Dan Patrick left there. Rozelle was an old hand. The sports commissioner is a hardened political lobbyist, and he was an old hand at Capitol Hill in the summer of 1966. In 1961, Rozelle lobbied the House and Brooklyn Democrat Emanuel Seller in an attempt to win a limited antitrust exemption so that the National Football League could sell the league's 14 franchises as one entity to a television network, which was either CBS or NBC. The Sports Broadcast Act of 1961 is signed into law by John Kennedy, September 30th that year. This is probably the most important piece of legislation that the president has ever signed in the 20th century, because it allowed the NFL to become the monopoly that Jim just explained about, how television builds the NFL with marketing partners, and the NFL takes off into a totally different orbit after this. However, this was not an original idea. This idea came from Branch Rickey, who ran the Brooklyn Dodgers and signed Jackie Robinson, went to Pittsburgh, thrown out of baseball, comes back and tries to start a new league called the Continental Baseball League. And he's looking for investors. And he leaves this pamphlet behind with all these potential investors, including Lamar Hunt in Dallas. Hunt looks at it, says, you know what, I'm going to concentrate on building this football league in 1959. But he looks at it and he says, hey, wait a minute. If I do this, if I make all of my teams equal partners and sell it to a TV network, that would be good because everybody would have the same amount of money. Lamar Hunt hired a guy by the name of Jay Michaels. Jim, of course, knows who Jay Michaels is. Most of you who watch Sunday Night Football probably have heard of his son, Alan Michaels. I think, Jim, you work with David Michaels, Al's brother, the TV director. And I worked with Susan Michaels on a show on the A&E network called History's Mysteries, which was horrible. But Jay Michaels, who was my friend Shelley Saltman's partner, Shelley was beaten up by Evel Knievel, is the guy who delivers ABC TV and Roone Arledge to the American Football League. And Pete Rozelle has envy. He says, I want to do the same thing. How do I go about it without violating antitrust laws? Well, you find a willing congressman like Emanuel Seller, and he gets it through the House in 2 days, goes up to the House. He's looking and he finds Estes Kiefhauer, who ran for vice president with Adlai Stevenson in 1959, 56 rather. And 1 day, 2 days through the House, 1 day through the Senate. It's on John Kennedy's desk. He signs it. It's the most important piece of legislation ever in the history of the National Football League, because NFL owners became rich beyond any kind of imagination that they had. And there is Russell Long on the left. He was the fifth most powerful Democrat in the Senate in 1966. He's conferring with Lyndon Johnson. I wonder if they're going through the betting line of that weekend. Well, anyway, and Russell Long Pete Rozelle has to convince him and Boggs, hey, this works. But, you know, Russell Long wasn't interested. Hal Boggs wasn't interested. Not at all, because they said, hey, you know, is this going to benefit New Orleans? Is it good for us? No, we don't have a team. You know what? Go away. Now, Long, of course, was one of the two senators in Louisiana, and you got Arkansas right there, and you got Mississippi and Alabama and Oklahoma and even Eastern Texas. And he could exert some pressure on, let's not do this, let's not vote for it, on the others. Same with Hal Boggs in Louisiana. So Rozelle is kind of in a dither here, or a pickle here. He's got to figure out, well, what am I supposed to do? He goes back to his owners and says, okay, we got to do something. We got to literally buy these guys' votes. Well, they come up with an initial idea, and it doesn't make Emanuel Seller too happy, because he's in Brooklyn, and the New York Jets, the franchise, is playing at Shea Stadium, which is in nearby Queens, which means that you could either drive there because they have a big parking lot, or you could transfer to the 7 train from Brooklyn and get to the stadium. And, you know, there are votes that are in Brooklyn, and the voters, some of them are Jets season ticket holders. So the National Football League was thinking about, hey, let's move the Jets franchise and Joe Namath, we'll move them to Los Angeles. Namath's got box office appeal. He'd be great in Hollywood. Okay, we'll do that. Daniel Reeves owned the Los Angeles Rams. Well, we'll send him down to San Diego. And then Barron Hilton, he owns the Chargers, but he's got a lot of business in New Orleans. So we could flip his team to New Orleans, and we'll figure out what to do with Oakland. We'll either move them to Seattle or Portland, because we don't want two teams in New York, and we don't want two teams in the San Francisco Bay Area. Wait 1 minute. Emmanuel Seller, who probably was elected around the War of 1812 in Brooklyn, says, no. This is not going to fly. You're not going to do this. All 24 teams that you have right now, 15 teams in the NFL, 9 teams in the American Football League, because they did add Miami, they got to stay where they are. And they got to stay there for 5 years. And the only way they could move is if they have stadiums that seat under 50,000, which only 2 teams would qualify, the Minnesota Vikings and the Chicago Bears at that time. Everybody's staying, or you don't get a merger. And okay, Rozelle hears that and goes back to his owner, said, listen, we got a problem with Long, we got a problem with Boggs, and now we got a problem with Seller. What should we do? And he says, let me think about it. Why don't we just give them a team? Let's just make it easy. Just give them a team and we'll make some money off of it. So they do make some money off of it. New Orleans gets a team. That's from last year's Mardi Gras when I was down in New Orleans and they were complaining about that lack of pass interference call. This was the Hot Nuts crew in their parade during Mardi Gras. They work out a deal with Hale Boggs. We'll put a team in New Orleans. Congress said, okay, you do that within, 10 days, we'll do this deal, and 10 days later, you better have a team. Well, 10 days later, because the bill is passed on October 21st, 1966, Halloween. So you don't want to exactly have a news conference, hey, we're going to have a team on Halloween, when All Saints Day is the next day in New Orleans. Within 11 days, New Orleans got a team. John Mecum got a team. And the NFL owners were enriched, and Hale Boggs did his job as a congressman. It was November 1st, 1966, the 16th franchise, New Orleans, in the NFL. Johnson signs the bill on November 8th. The NFL, they got some money out of this. They got about $8 million from Mecum, which was split among the 15 teams, which means everybody got about $500,000. Oh, by the way, because the New York Jets stayed in New York, Sonny Werblin and his partners had to give Wellington Mara $10 million for invading their territory. Oakland Raiders, Al Davis and his partners, because he went back after being AFL commissioner, they had to hand over $8 million to San Francisco. The vote in the American Football League for the merger, 7-2. The two that did not want the merger, New York Jets and Sonny as in Money Werblin, and Al Davis and the Oakland Raiders. That pen is on display at the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So the league pockets $8 million in expansion fee. The Jets and Giants have to work out their deal. Raiders and 49ers, their deal. And the American Football League decides, hey, we're going to also expand to 10 teams. And we're going to Cincinnati. We're going to get $7.5 million, but that $7.5 million went into the 16 NFL owners' pockets, or 15 owners in the Green Bay Packers board of directors. So the NFL made out well. Vince Lombardi. The Lombardi ever win the Lombardi Trophy? The answer to that is no. And this is the first one that they won because the guy doesn't have a face mask. Anyway, Mickey Mouse. You know, the thing about Mickey Mouse, which always got me, and happy birthday, Mickey. I think he's 92 years old today, Mickey, or it was yesterday he was 92 years old. That rodent is worth billions of dollars. But when I was growing up as a kid, Mickey Mouse, it's a Mickey Mouse thing. It's a Mickey Mouse thing. Oh, yeah, it's terrible. Mickey Mouse thing. That's a Mickey Mouse league. Green Bay played Kansas City in the first American Football League, National Football League championship game. That was on January 15th, 1967. Vince Lombardi didn't want to play the game. His team already won the NFL championship, and he referred to the AFL as a Mickey Mouse League. Well, there were only about 28 days to put together the game in Los Angeles. So you had a stadium, the Los Angeles Coliseum, about 1/3 empty. And as you can see in this picture, between Len Dawson talking to his Kansas City offense and Green Bay setting up defensively, it was the last Super Bowl, which was called the American Football League, National Football League, World Championship game. And on that picture, the attendance is 63,036 for that game. 94,000 seat Coliseum. Ticket price is $12, $10, and $6. For $6 today, you might be able to pass the stadium in Tampa near I-4 and just wave and hand over $6 because it's not going to be that anymore. About 33,000 empty seats the last time that it was not a sellout. It was the pride of CBS, William Paley, chairman of CBS, against that dastardly David Sarnoff over at NBC. It was Sarnoff who forked over the money to make the AFL league. Sonny Whirlwind, who was a talent agent, and Liz Taylor's public relations director, got to own the Jets. He knew Sarnoff because he was giving TV shows over the Sarnoff through MCA, and David Wasserman, whose grandson is running the 2028 Los Angeles Olympics. So it was the pride of CBS. Played on January 15th, 1967. As Jim said, CBS and NBC, they alternated games, but not 1967. They used the same television feed, different announcers, different advertisers. CBS chairman Bill Paley leaned on Lombardi. He's coaching for CBS's Pride. Now, unfortunately, it's been almost 54 years since that game was played. And Jim, why don't you explain why the tape of the game doesn't exist if you're still out there? Jim, still out there?
I can tell you.
No, Jim, you still there? Well, if Jim's not there, I'll tell you why. Tapes were way too expensive. Way, way, way too expensive. And they felt, this game isn't going to mean anything. Why should we keep it? It's not a space shot. It's not Kennedy being assassinated. We'll just tape something over, whatever the next event was for CBS after that.
Soap operas.
And NBC, whatever is after that. NBC would be after that would be Major League Baseball, or maybe a game show. That's why game shows aren't around anymore. The tapes have never, ever been found. The NFL put out a $10 million bounty a few years ago looking for somebody. Maybe somebody stored the tapes when it went to Armed Forces Network.
Evan, I'm here.
Nothing,
I'm sorry.
nothing.
I had a mute problem.
No. Jim, but you, how much do those tapes cost back in those days?
They're 2-inch tapes, and they cost about $200. But the Super Bowl tapes, the famous, infamous whatever happened in Super Bowl III, they were able to piece enough of it back together to get almost the entire game in. But yeah, the tapes were burned over, and which was not an uncommon thing in those days. For TV shows just to get recorded over it over videotapes. But yeah, it was pretty amazing in that situation, and the coordination, as you talked about for Super Bowl I, was really kind of almost the type of negotiations you would look at for world peace, because they both wanted desperately to showcase. But real quick, and I'll let you get back to your riff, but real quick, the 67 game, because NBC televised all the AFL games in color, forced CBS to do something they hadn't done all year, and that was actually televise a game in color. So that cost CBS more. As Uplinger said, it's not what we wanted to do, it was what we had to do to keep up with NBC. CBS actually had to do color, which, as I said, they did one game a week in color. The rest of them were in black and white. So that was kind of the NBC putting the peacock out there in color, because as we all know, why did NBC use color? Because it sold television
Sold
sets.
television. And our friend Hal Uplinger, the late Hal Uplinger, invented instant replay with Tony Werner over at the Army-Navy game in 1963. So the tapes were expensive, and given that the tapes were expensive, they didn't keep them. And you know how much it would cost to have stored those tapes? Because Hal told me, $25 a year to store the tapes, and they didn't have the money for that. Now, Mickey Mouse, too. This was Jerry Kramer, an interview, the Hall of Fame, Jerry Kramer now, the Hall of Famer. He gave me an interview in 1988. And he was talking about, I was talking to Frank Gifford years ago, the New York Giant player who was Vince Lombardi's favorite player of all time. Lombardi coached him with the New York Giants. He said that when he was assistant coach, I was talking to Frank Gifford years ago, and he mentioned that he announced that first Super Bowl game. Gifford said he was fairly cool, calm, and relaxed, and he went over, put his arm around Vince's shoulder, and Lombardi was shaking like a leaf. Gifford said, that really made me nervous. Gifford, of course, was a CBS announcer and represented the NFL. Money, money, money. There's NBC. CBS and NBC charged $42,000 for a 30-second commercial. I guess it's in about $5 million for a 30-second spot this year. The two networks gave the NFL $9.5 million to televise the game. The leagues couldn't even agree on which ball to use. When Green Bay was on offense, they used the Wilson Duke football, the Duke named after the Giants owner, Wellington Mara. And Kansas City used the AFL-sanctioned Spalding J5V ball. And like Jim said, it was negotiations, peace negotiations. Ford, the NFL sponsor, against Chrysler, the AFL sponsor. CBS, NBC, NFL establishment sports writers like Tex Mall of Sports Illustrated against the AFL announcer, Kurt Gowdy. It just wasn't a game. But as Texas E. Schramm told me once, and Texas was one of these guys like Foghorn, remember Foghorn Leghorn, the cartoon character? It all subsided. And Tex has this a little wrong because, well, Tex was being Tex. The Super Bowl kind of put the icing on the cake, and the interest in the National Football League kept rolling until it was the most popular spectator sport in the United States. First Super Bowl, 1967. Harris Poll. Baseball fell behind football in 1965, but hey, it was Tex, and Tex was always subject to hyperbole. And there is the Los Angeles Coliseum. The Super Bowl name, Al Davis actually started calling it the Super Bowl II in 1968. His Raiders played the Green Bay Packers in 1968. Nobody ever could think of a proper name for this thing. Lamar Hunt was the guy who came up with the idea, and Pete Rozelle, who was born in 1926 and was of his time, told me one day, the Super Bowl, the name was corny. And I looked at Rozelle, because I'm about 30 years old at that point. He's about 60. And I said, corny? I haven't heard that used since the 1960s. But he used the word corny to describe Super Bowl as a name. In a July 25th, 1966 letter to Rozelle, Hunt wrote, I have kiddingly called it Super Bowl, which obviously can be improved upon. It was never improved upon. It was one of the spur-of-the-moment things. No one ever said it, Hunt told me. What we are going to call it. It was one of those things that just came out of the mouth. It was not too inspired. Or was it? Well, let's think of this. Hunt is home. This is about 1966. And he's watching his kids play with this little ball, which I loved. I had a yellow one. And the kids are throwing against the wall, and the ball is going all over the place. Hunt. They each had a super ball that my wife had given to them, and they were always talking about them, which I did too when I was 10 years old, and I just used the expression, Super Bowl. It was an accidental thing. By the way, the NFL initially did not trademark Super Bowl until somebody said, hey, wait a minute, we better do that before somebody else gets it. And there it is. There it is, the Super Bowl. As far as Whammo put this thing out, Whammo began putting this thing out in 1964. Its shelf life considerably less than the Super Bowl. It was a toy made of Zectron. There was a chemical engineer by the name of Norman Stingley who found that at 50,000 pounds of pressure, Zectron becomes uncontrollably bouncy. Whammo got the ball out in 1964. It was double top secret, that formula for Zectron, which really wasn't. People knew what it was. And it was copied by Whammo's competitors, and the Super Bowl just went off into the ozones, never to be heard from again by 1976. But Lamar Hunt's lack of inspired thought is still going strong. And that's Bruce Morton to to Joe Namath's right, and that's me to Namath's left. This is 1988. We're talking to Joe Namath on the 20th anniversary of the New York Jets winning the Super Bowl. Behind Bruce, to the left, is Weeb Eubank, who was the coach of that team that won the Super Bowl. Look at those big old Marantz tape recorders. There is a guy who is totally forgotten now. Guy by the name of Lou Michaels. He played with the Baltimore Colts. And let me say, the Jets did win the Super Bowl that day. Lou Michaels was the ultimate loser. And here is why. He was the kicker on the Baltimore Colts. And it was him that Joe Namath picked on in a Fort Lauderdale bar that got Joe Namath to say, I guarantee the Jets will win. Lou Michaels remembers. Lou Michaels' brother, Walt, was the Jets defensive coordinator that year. And he just passed away recently. Walt did. I must say, Joe was a very cocky individual. I never expected that from Joe when he walked into the place. He had a fur coat on. I'll never forget it, a fur coat in Miami. Actually, Namath came in with Jim Hudson initially, looked around, then saw Michaels, left, and then came back in to say this. And he points to me instead of saying, hi, I'm Joe Namath. I thought he was going to introduce himself and say hello. He points over to me and says, we're going to kick the out of you, and I'm going to do it. Joe had a good week that week. Hey, can you imagine Tom Brady sitting on the beach in Clearwater giving a news conference? That was 1969. Shows you the lack of sophistication. Hey, Sadie, the girls back in the Bronx, they're never going to believe we went to Miami on this trip. And look, Sadie, there's my friend Gertrude, and Gertie and I are looking, it's Joe Namath, we're here with him. And there's the assembled New York sports writers, including Paul Zimmerman with the black shirt over there looking at Joe from the New York Post, and Larry Fox there and a whole bunch of others. There's a guy in the back saying, what's going on here? And that woman just is totally oblivious to everything going on. Joe Namath holds a news conference on the beach.
Jerry Green also. Jerry Green from the Detroit News is there too.
Yeah, but
he's the guy. He's the guy with the newspaper on his head.
Oh, okay. There you go. But can you imagine Tom Brady holding a news conference like this? This is how unprofessional it was back then. Jets and Colts game is the turning point. Joe guarantees the win. He delivers. Because of Joe and the name change to Super Bowl, the Super Bowl takes on a new life. As far as Lou Michaels, his team loses. He gets insulted by Namath at the bar. He makes a bet with his brother, Walt. Whoever wins the game gets bragging rights. But there's $5,000 more that goes to the winner. And that $5,000 should go to the pastor at the local church in Swearsville, Pennsylvania. Walt welched on the bet. Lou Michaels got $8,000. He takes $5,000 of it and gives it to the padre, as he called him, at the church. He brings home $3,000. Walt never paid up. And there was some bad feelings between the two brothers because of that. Lou Michaels, the ultimate loser. There was a flimsy pregame show. There was a marching band. The three Apollo 8 astronauts, Frank Borman, William Anders, and Jim Lovell, who had circled the moon 2 weeks earlier, led the crowd in the Pledge of Allegiance. The national anthem was performed by a trumpet player, Lloyd Geisler. He was from the Washington Symphony. Al Hurt had done the trumpet playing national anthem in Los Angeles in Game 1. And the Florida A&M University Marching Band performed the halftime show. And there is Lou Michaels. Lou was the biggest loser of that game. Arguably, that victory was the most important win in National Football League history, or most important game. It put the AFL on par with the established league. The NFL had a hot property, the Super Bowl. which would go on to become a national event and the most watched TV event of the year. Lou Michaels has no idea that that January 5th, 1969 meeting would lay the foundation to turn the Super Bowl into a national obsession. There is Pat Mahomes from last year's Super Bowl and Andy Reid getting last year's Lombardi trophy, a trophy that Lombardi never lived to see or win because he passed away from cancer in 1970, and they renamed the Super Bowl championship trophy the Lombardi Trophy. Now, one thing about Lombardi, and we talked about civil rights in the Super Bowl, he was a major civil rights pioneer in Wisconsin. By 1967, the Green Bay Packers fielded a squad with 13 black athletes, the most in NFL history, including Willie Davis, Willie Wood, Dave Robinson, Herb Adderley, who just passed away, and Bob Jeter. He also had gay players, both on the Packers and on the Washington Redskins. And he told his players, they're one of us. I don't want to hear anything about that. A civil rights pioneer that Richard Nixon thought about as his vice presidential running mate in 1968 until he found out Lombardi was a Democrat. Now, the Super Bowl parties, as Jim talked about before the commercials, the Super Bowl parties, that's the Queen Mary. And about 5 years ago, I was out in Long Beach and spending the day in Long Beach because I speak on cruise ships, the cruise ship right behind the Queen Mary, the princess there. And it was the Queen Mary that in 1971, if you were anybody in Los Angeles, anybody who was anybody in Los Angeles, and believe it's 1973, 1971, you were on the Queen Mary at a Super Bowl party, and word leaked out. Hey, you know what? They're partying about the Super Bowl. That's the start of the parties. 1973. Again, Jim and I, our mutual friend, the late Shea Saltman, was on the Queen Mary, and he told me all about this social event. Dean Martin was there, and all these other people were there. And it brings in a new era for the Super Bowl parties. And it's party time. I work with John Madden. Hey, there's the hot dog. Where's the dog? Oh, the dog's there, and the mustard and ketchup. That was important for John Madden because his favorite sandwich was a mustard and ketchup sandwich, in case you were interested in that. There are the chips. There's the wings, all that other stuff. It's party time. Biggest party time, second, maybe third biggest party time of the year. Every community in America is touched by the Super Bowl. Big screen TV sales. Supermarkets have super sales. May not happen in 2021, may happen again in 2022, depending on the vaccine. There is such a thing called the Beer Institute. Lori Levy was a lobbyist. She took me out to lunch one day to explain just how big a party day the Super Bowl really was. Second biggest food consumption day of the year behind Thanksgiving. All those big screen TVs go that week. According to the National Electronics Dealers Association, sales of large screen TVs increased 500% during the Super Bowl week because there's a demand to watch the big game. Beer here. The Beer Institute has data that suggests, depending on the year, that the Super Bowl is one of the 7 biggest sales days of the year, behind Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve, 4th of July. It is up there. The Beer Institute, Washington, D.C. Look them up. Newspapers, whatever's left of newspapers, sell advertising for special Super Bowl sections. It's a moneymaker for supermarkets, department stores, bars, snack food makers, breweries, restaurants, and probably this year, Amazon. It's also the springboard for companies, which Jim didn't mention, but I'll mention that, for companies to start their annual TV, radio, and print campaigns. And you remember the commercials, which Jim talked about. In 2020, the average cost of the ticket for the past 5 Super Bowls, $5,706. Average cost of a 30-second commercial last year, $5.6 million, up 107% in the last 12 years. Oh, this one, Madden would love this one. 1.4 billion chicken wings will be eaten over Super Bowl weekend. 1.2 million pounds of chips, 8 million pounds of guacamole, and 10 million pounds of ribs, and who knows how much Pepto-Bismol. 1 in 2 people would sacrifice their vacation days for 1 year to watch their team win the Super Bowl. 1 in 3 would give up their annual bonuses. Last year, it was suggested that 22.7 million Americans were likely to bet on the Super Bowl legally, or about $325 million on the game. The commercials, which Jim talked about, Joe Namath is now pitching Medicare. In fact, I was looking at him saying today, I was seeing a commercial with him, I said, that guy was once a sex symbol. Now he's pitching Medicare. Panty Hose. Remember him and Panty Hose? There you go. Joe liked Panty Hose.
75 years old now.
He's 77, and there he is today. There is Joe today at the age of 77. I'm happy I called. The Super Bowl commercials, as Jim is still here? If you're still here, I just want to ask you if I'm correct or not on this. Whether or not the Super Bowl commercials take second, if the game takes second place as a news event, yes or no? It takes second place, the game.
Yeah.
To everything else, to the commercials and everything that went on. That commercial.
Also, don't forget the halftime show.
And I'm going to get to that. That is the iconic commercial. The absolute iconic commercial, which was done about 4 miles from my house. Right. The stadium has been knocked down now. Joe Green, the jersey, the Coke kid. Yeah. Some of the best commercials, the Apple Sledgehammer, the Pepsi commercial where the Coke guy takes a Pepsi, Tabasco sauce with mosquito, Doritos, 3D Doritos, Budweiser, the Clydesdales, 2003, Reebok, Terry Tate, office linebacker, and Betty White. Betty White and her Snickers commercial back in 2010. So the commercials are a big deal, but politics has never left. Politics is always there. The Arizona problem in 1989, 1990. The National Football League owners gave Bill Bidwell, the Phoenix Cardinals owner who really put that franchise into the ground after moving it from St. Louis to Phoenix, overestimating the market because Bill wasn't all that bright. His adopted son is bright, but he's not or wasn't. The 1993 Super Bowl was put into Tempe because there was sagging attendance problems, but there was a problem. Ronald Reagan signed the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday into law in 1986. The governor, Babbitt, in 1986 said, that's great, we're going to have a holiday here. But the new governor, the Republican governor, Evan Meacham, in 1987, canceled the holiday, and John McCain was his major supporter, saying we have too many federal holidays. Bidwell would take the team to Tempe in 1988. Martin Luther King and the big game. He never saw a big game, by the way. The performer Stevie Wonder announced that he was going to boycott the game. He was going to boycott Arizona. No concerts in Arizona. Convention planners also said, we're not here anymore. We're out. You're not going to recognize King Holiday? We're gone. The battle was on. And all of a sudden, the National Football League is in the middle of a battle that they wanted no part of. The voters back in 1989, goodbye, Jim, I'll talk to you tomorrow, Jim. In 1989, the state legislature said, okay, you know what, we're going to override what the governor said, and we're going to redo the holiday. But opponents said, we're going to challenge you. And they went out and they got a petition, and they got enough signatures on the ballot to get this before state voters in November of 1990. The referendum, we're going to honor King or we're not going to honor King. The NFL put a lot of pressure on Arizona voters. They said, you got the Super Bowl in 1993. If you want to keep that Super Bowl, you vote in favor of the holiday. But guess what? Arizona voters in 1990 said, nope, don't want it. Goodbye. And the NFL pulled the Super Bowl. Well, 2 years are about to pass. And the NFL said, listen, we'll give you a redo, presidential election of 1992. We'll redo it during the presidential election year. You vote for it, we'll give you the next available game. We pulled the game out of Tempe, sent it to Pasadena, California. But the next one is available in 1996. We'll give it to you, but you better vote, and you better vote for the holiday. Arizona voters did narrowly approve the holiday. The NFL, this was in November, by the spring meeting of 1993, Tempe got the big game in 1996. Jim talked about the Tampa Super Bowl in the Sombrero in Tampa. Here's a question for you. Whitney Houston, she does the national anthem. And when I'm live and when I'm doing this, I ask the people there, hey, is this live or on tape? And you get back the answers live and on tape. And you could guess if you want, but I'm going to, for brevity here, I'm going to give you the answer. Jim Steig, an old friend of mine from the National Football League, was in charge of NFL events. And this is what he said. In January of that year, our coordinator of Super Bowl pregame activities, Bob Best, produced a recording of the Florida Orchestra for the national anthem producer, Ricky Minor. A week later, Minor flew to Los Angeles to have Whitney record the vocal track. Amazingly, it was done in one take. Maybe the most famous Super Bowl was not, maybe the most famous national anthem, at least in recent memory, was not live. It was on tape. Whitney did it in one take. Let's fast forward to 2004. Usually I ask the question here. This game is played in Houston, and I asked the question, who played in the 2004 Janet Jackson, Justin Timberlake Super Bowl? I'll give you the final score. It was 32-29. Do you know who played? Inevitably, nobody knows who played. Nobody remembers it, but they remember Janet Jackson. In fact, 6 weeks after this game was done, I gave a talk on football up at Ithaca College, and I asked people, who were the teams in the Super Bowl? And this was sports business management majors. They couldn't remember that New England beat Carolina 32-29 in that game. They remembered Janet Jackson and the costume malfunction at halftime in the game in Houston, which caused the political football and changed how TV and radio presented programming. ABC showing, Easter Day showing of Saving Private Ryan is impacted by Janet Jackson's costume malfunction, believe it or not. Basically, nobody saw it live. Nobody saw it live. People before Facebook, before Twitter, before TikTok, before LinkedIn, before any of that was either Yahoo Instant Messenger or AOL Instant Messenger. And people started texting, or actually it wasn't texting, started messaging each other saying, hey, did you see what I saw? No, I didn't see. Well, do you have TiVo? Yeah, I got TiVo. Go back to and slow it down, 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 slow it down. They slowed it down. And they saw one frame of an exposed breast of Janet Jackson. And all of a sudden, the politicians started coming out and condemning CBS, condemning Viacom, condemning MTV for such smut during a family show like the Super Bowl. Incidentally, you got to remember one thing about football. The object of football is 11 guys beating up the other 11 guys. And the strong survive, and the stronger score touchdowns and win games. And there are a lot of injuries and concussions and all this other stuff. But this was indecent. Michael Powell and the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, dug in and started going after other areas of indecency. In fact, in October of 2004, Commissioner Powell, the son of Colin Powell, and his FCC colleagues, and FCC is run by whoever is in office. It's 3-2 the panel. It was Bush in office, 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats. And they started thinking about whether or not a hockey game that featured fights was suitable programming between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. daily, forgetting that on every play in football, there's a fight. So the FCC acts. Justin Timberlake grabs Janet Jackson in the dance routine, accidentally forces open her dress. One of the breasts comes out for 9/16 of a second. But that 9/16 of a second leaves an impression. Politicians started going after CBS and the MTV unit. Within 15 hours, politicians gathered on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, pointing their finger at Jackson, not at Timberlake, at Jackson. And CBS, they promoted something immoral, even though it was Justin Timberlake who popped open the costume. The hammer came down in CBS. The Republican FCC majority got involved. They fined Viacom/CBS $550,000, changed indecency rules. CBS Viacom fought the fines for 7 years and eventually would win in court. They paid more money to fight the fines than actually paying the fines. But it comes down to Saving Private Ryan, the movie that came out in the late 1990s, a Steven Spielberg movie. Tom Hanks starred in it, and Saving Private Ryan. And Saving Private Ryan had been on TV before, but because of Janet Jackson, because of Justin Timberlake, because of what happened with the politicians, there were stations that got skittish, absolutely skittish about showing Saving Private Ryan, because the FCC raised the amount stations and networks could be docked for what was termed questionable images and dirty words. 2004, television stations, virtually every one of them in the southern part of the United States, television stations were scared off by the prospect of fines. 65 ABC TV affiliates, again, mostly in the southern United States, southeast United States, did not show the movie Saving Private Ryan because of foul language concerns. The TV stations didn't want to risk a fine. Saving Private Ryan had won 5 Academy Awards following its release in 1998. Twice it was on ABC, 2001 and 2002. It was missed in 2003. Military veterans groups were furious with the stations. Disney ABC said, we'll pay your fines, because they were going to get a lot of money in advertising, if indeed you're going to get fined. There was one complaint in the previous 2 showings in 2002, and the FCC ignored the foul language complaint. The halftime show would change. Oh, it had changed over the years. Upward People had been one of the acts back in the 1980s. So let's do a safe act. Paul McCartney, who spent 9 days in a Japanese jail because of marijuana, but he was a safe act. These guys, Keith, Ronnie, and Mick, the Rolling Stones, they were considered a safe act. Particularly Keith Richards, safe act. Rodney Wood, safe act. Mick Jagger, safe act. The Who, 2 of the 4 original members of The Who. The drummer Keith Moon, who didn't necessarily die of a drug overdose. He died after taking a legal drug because he was in sad shape in 1977. And John Entwistle, he died because of overdose on coke. 2 of the 4, yet they were a safe act. Pete Townsend and Roger Daughtry. More Than a Game, Mariah Carey, Michael Jackson, Madonna, Justin Timberlake, twice. They brought him back years later after his costume malfunction. Beyonce, Janet Jackson, Paul McCartney, the Rolling Stones, The Who, Whitney Houston, Lady Gaga, just some of the performers who have done the halftime shows. It's in Tampa this year. Next year, Inglewood, California. Glendale, Arizona in 2023. It will not be in New Orleans in 2024 because even the NFL knows Mardi Gras is bigger than the Super Bowl. So they're going to kick that back to 2025 and award probably Las Vegas the game in 2024. Hey, the Orange Bowl, that's where Joe Namath put the game on the map, and my wife decided to, hey, she was under the goalpost. She had scored. The event, the NFL stopped putting the game out for bid. That was 1982, by the way. The NFL stopped putting the game out for bid and selects communities after a community shows interest. You want interest in the game? This is how much it costs. We'll take it. The NFL TV, Jim's not here. He could explain this, but I'll explain it. February is one of the 3 major rating periods for networks, and the network that gets the Super Bowl wins the rating sweeps, which means local affiliates can charge over the next 3 months after the sweeps come out, over the 3-month period until the next sweeps, more money for commercials because the Super Bowl won the sweeps. The NFL claims it will attempt to globalize the game with London, the UK as a possible site. Considering how this game came about through Congress, don't count on that. The NFL has embraced Las Vegas after years of being against legalized gambling. It's a Super Bowl contender. A few years ago, the Las Vegas Visitors Convention Bureau wanted to buy an ad on the Super Bowl, and the NFL said, no, 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 we're against gambling. Now, of course, the NFL embraces gambling, has gambling partners, and the National Football League Players Association has a fantasy gambling partner. Houston got the game in 2017. In 2017, Channel 13 in Houston wanted to know how much was it going to cost the city, because the NFL always says, well, you know, you're going to get $300 million for the game in economic impact. Well, Channel 13 went around to find out how much public funding was going into the week-long NFL party. The answer, $26 million from Harris County in Texas taxpayers. Another loss, the Arizona Super Bowl, way back in 2014. Jerry Weirs, who's still the mayor of Glendale, Arizona, told ESPN, the magazine, that the Super Bowl is a local money loser. Weirs claimed that in 2008, Glendale lost $1 million on the game, although the Arizona Cardinals owner said, you got $13 million in free advertising. Nobody goes to Glendale. They go to Scottsdale. They go to Phoenix. They don't go to Glendale, except maybe for Arizona Coyotes hockey, or maybe to see a spring training game featuring the White Sox or the Chicago White Sox or Los Angeles Dodgers. It's just not on the must-do list in Arizona going to Glendale. It's not like going to the Grand Canyon 3.5 hours north. But they got $13 million of free advertising, which, I don't know, you could pay local workers with, except there's no money there, but you got the free advertising. Glendale's numbers backed up Weirs, who was not the mayor in 2008. Glendale in 2008 spent $3 million in city services on the game and got back $1 million in taxes from various spending at places including hotels, motels, restaurants, car agencies. And by the way, money that goes to all of that, unless it's locally owned, restaurants probably are for the most part, but where they're staying, the hotels and motels, it's not exactly mom and pop hotel. It goes back to a central office. Another loss, Indianapolis. It lost money on hosting the Super Bowl, but hey, Indianapolis got free publicity. Fans do come with money to games. They do come with, well, maybe not him because he couldn't afford a shirt. Some Super Bowl goers do spend money at hotels and motels and car rental agencies, but if they're not locally owned, Super Bowl rate hikes at those places. They don't stay in the host city. Goes back to a home office. Same with restaurants. Oh yeah, some people, taxi drivers, people who clean hotel, motel rooms, parking lot attendants, waiters and waitresses might get more tip money, but a good chunk of the Super Bowl spending, it doesn't end up in non-hospitality businesses. In Florida, nobody's going to Neiman Marcus. Oh, let's go to Neiman Marcus because there's a Super Bowl in town. That's not happening. Minneapolis got the Super Bowl in 2018. State officials estimated Minnesota lost $9 million in taxes because of breaks given to the NFL. Local communities, $2 million in taxes. Atlanta 2019. This is what the NFL wanted. Hotel rooms for 8 nights for each participating team, including 150 standard rooms, 2 presidential suites, because the owners need it, and 5 other suites. We're not paying for the use of the stadium. No. What are you crazy? We're not paying for it. You should be proud to have us here. 10 security officers to each hotel during the day, 5 at night. Police escorts for team owners to and from the games. You wouldn't want the team owner to drive to a game. Peachtree Street. They meet up with each other. Actually, it's Peachtree Street, Peachtree Place. Approximately 10,000 parking spaces for game use. NFL, we keep all the parking. Hey, you're lucky to have us here. A wide range of lesser items, up to 2,000 banners on street poles, setting up social media monitoring and response center. Yeah, in Atlanta, you can do other things like go to the Martin Luther King Center. Oh, you don't want to go there. We got a party to throw. The NFL will retain all revenue from ticket sales. Even the host committee has to buy its tickets, up to 750 of them, at face value. Oh yeah, by the way, $10 million estimated value to the NFL of sales tax exemption on Super Bowl tickets. That was passed by the Georgia legislature in 2018 rather. Atlanta's bid committee also agreed to an NFL requirement that the host city reimburse the league and its teams for all other state and local taxes that they had to pay in connection with having the Super Bowl. You want the Super Bowl? You pay us. It's not the other way around. Some of the enhancements included a $2 million contribution for use towards certain NFL expenses related to a game, possible $1 million contribution to complement state and city efforts in case of inclement weather, a party for people like me and Kent and Jim, 2,000 media members at a cost, only $375,000. Great party, $375,000, and a pledge to provide NFL owners with VIP private airport accommodations. Miami got the Super Bowl last year. Miami-Dade taxpayers gave the owner of the Miami Dolphins, the University of Michigan graduate and New York real estate mogul, Stephen Ross, $4 million because he got a Super Bowl. And there was $10 million for the cost of game expenses, including police protection and other services. Oh, hey, the NFL, no, we're going to give you something. Don't worry about it. We're going to give you something because we know you want to upgrade 2 public parks. And we know that's going to cost $3 million, so we'll give you $850,000. Nice of them. And that's the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl is an economic engine for the NFL. It was created by an act of Congress. Cities bid for it because they think, as in Jacksonville's case, if you bring the Super Bowl in, CEOs will come, they'll see the area, and they will relocate their business in town. That doesn't happen either. It's a game. It's a social event. It's a party event. It's enjoyable, but people don't remember who wins the game. Literally, 4 weeks later, very few people remember. That's me and Marcus Allen. Back, I think that was 1993. I still have that sport coat, by the way, and it still fits. Anyway, thank you, Donella, for inviting me. Any questions, any comments? The floor.
Thank you so much. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah, the floor. Did you learn anything?
A lot.
Did you know that?
I'm glad we're recording it.
Did you know the Super Bowl was a product of the Civil Rights era?
No, I didn't. Oh, Linda said same thing. She said she learned a lot.
Okay.
Evan, you want to take questions? Maybe you can pull your presentation down. Maybe people want to ask you any questions.
Yeah, I'm fine. You know, I have nothing better to do for the rest of the night. So if you want to ask questions, go ahead.
Yeah, if anyone wants to unmute themselves. Linda, any questions or comment? Yeah, I'll unmute. I'm in the light. I don't want to make too much noise. I'm gonna put myself back on mute for.
Well, if nobody else has anything, thank you so much, Danella, for inviting me. Hopefully,
thank you. Always a pleasure.
Hopefully we could do this again next year, maybe even in person, if the right vaccine comes along and is distributed and they get a hold of the containment. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Linda, for coming. I want to thank Jim, who helped out here. Jim and I work on projects together, and I said, thank you, Linda. I appreciate it. Jim and I work on projects together, and I said, hey, let's have some fun and talk about the TV angle of all of this. And Jim has been with Super Bowl and has done all kinds of other things. And he was part of the Michael Dukakis campaign in 1988. And he was, remember the Arsenio Hall show? He was helping direct the Arsenio Hall show for a while as well. So he hadn't spent his entire time in sports. And also, if you remember Live Aid, if you do remember Live Aid, Jim was part of the technical crew for our friend Hal Uplinger. And in case you are interested in Live Aid, our friend Hal Uplinger, there is an interview with him. It's a 90-minute interview with him up at the Smithsonian Institute talking about Live Aid and how he let me down. Because we were putting together a radio sports network at the time, and he calls me up one day and he says, I'm gone, it's you and Eric Moffat to put together. I said, what do you got? And he said, they got some idea about doing this rock concert that's going to raise money for people. It's going to be based in London and based in Philadelphia. And they told me I have to put this technical thing together. And I said, oh, does that mean that you're leaving me? He said, yeah, I'm leaving you. But he hired Jim for Live Aid. He didn't hire me, but I didn't have any role in Live Aid. But Hal was a television pioneer, and if you're interested in Live Aid and our friend Hal, you can go to the Smithsonian Institute, and there's a video. All you have to do is look up Hal Uplinger, Uplinger. So anyway, thank you so much. My name is Evan
Thanks.
Weiner. And,
Thanks, Evan. Have a good night.
Yeah, and I've recorded this for you. So